that's it. So Hannah, welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Elisa and Joseph and Nicole. I'm really honored to lead this program before Christmas, and I'm very excited to have such a huge crowd from all over the world. So I'm really thankful for you for joining us this evening. I will talk about the Nativity story and about Bethlehem, and I will share the screen. So I will show you some photos from Bethlehem. And of course, if you have a question, you can write them in the chat and we'll try to answer them toward the end of the tour. As you can hear by my accent, I am an Israeli. I grew up here and lived here all my life. I'm Jewish, and I will share the screen to show you. I'm working, as Elisa said, for the Rossing Center for Education and Dialogue. I am the director of a program called the Jerusalem Center for Jewish-Christian Relations. Here it is, just a second, okay. So I'm responsible for the Jerusalem Center for Jewish-Christian Relations, and I work a lot with local Israelis, teaching them about the Christians in the Holy Land, but also about Christianity and Christianity in the Holy Land. And I talk a lot about Jewish-Christian relations in the Holy Land, which is quite unique and different from other places around the world, because this is the only place in the world where we Jews are the majority and Christians the minority. And around Christmas time, I talk a lot about Christmas and what is Christmas and Nativity story, and I try to teach Israeli Jews about the heritage of the land. So maybe it's not part of our heritage, but it's heritage of the land where we're living, and that's what I'm going to try to share with you. So we're going to go on our way to Bethlehem, and I start with this photo from May 2020, because that was the day when the Church of Nativity was reopened after 2 months when it was closed. This is one of the places that are always open 365 days a year. And it was very rare to find the church closed for 2 months when COVID started. And then when it was reopened in May, it was great excitement, and there was a hope that we are over that and now pilgrim would be able to come and visit the church. But unfortunately, Lisa just took this photo a couple of days ago, and as you can see, the city of Bethlehem is still empty. So unfortunately, we're still waiting for this pandemic to be over and to be able to visit different sites and be present in the holy places and not just to talk about them from a distance. So with these prayers in our heart that we all share in the Holy Land, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, we will start our tour. And if we follow the Gospel of Luke, our tour should start in Nazareth, where the Virgin received the Annunciation. They walked to Jerusalem and Bethlehem, where Jesus will be born. If we start, of course, the story according to the Gospel of Matthew, we have to start somewhere around Jerusalem. And from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, we're talking about a very short distance. Actually, you can walk it in 2 hours from the old city of Jerusalem to the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem. It's about 1.5 miles, very close cities to each other. They were always close, always connected. When pilgrims used to come to Jerusalem, they always went to Bethlehem until today. So the couple, Joseph and Mary, walked either from Nazareth or from Jerusalem and from that area toward Bethlehem. But on the way to Bethlehem, when we walk from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, and by the way, a lot of Christians do that during Christmas time. During the whole month of December, you will find groups walking toward Bethlehem from Jerusalem. On the way, we're going to pass Rachel's tomb. And we cannot ignore Rachel's tomb because it has a very important meaning in the story of the Nativity. So Rachel gave birth to her youngest son, and she died. And the book of Genesis said, so Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrata, that is Bethlehem. Over her tomb, Jacob set up a pillar. And to this day, that pillar marks Rachel's tomb. Actually, near Rachel's tomb, there is a place called Jacob Tower, where in the Middle Ages, people said that was the place where Rachel gave birth to Benjamin. Today, there is a Catholic ecumenical institute there, and it's called Tantu. So in your next visit, you can visit the site on the top of the hill. Tantu in Arabic means the top, the peak of the hill. But next to that place is the tomb of Rachel. So Rachel died when she gave birth to her son, and she was buried on the way near Bethlehem. And when Christian passed near the tomb of Rachel, which used to look like the picture on the left, at least in the 19th century, and today looks more like the picture here to the right, it's inside a building. They think about the place where the tomb of Rachel appears in the gospel. The gospel mentioned, the gospel of Matthew, according to Matthew, mentions the tomb of Rachel, but in a different context, not in the context of the book of Genesis, but in the context of the book of Micah. The book of Jeremiah. In the book of Jeremiah, prophet Jeremiah has a lot of horrible prophecies, but he has one prophecy of consolation. That's chapter 31. And this is the chapter that is quoted in the gospel according to Matthew. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because there are no more. And you read that as part of the story of the Nativity in the gospel according to Matthew, and immediately we think about the innocents, the children, the babies that were that Herod is going to kill and destroy the young generation of young people around Judea area. But we have to remember that this is not the full sentence. This is not the full chapter, because there's another verse following Rachel weeping for her children. Restrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for your work will be rewarded, declared the Lord. They will return from the land of the enemy. So there is hope for your descendants, declared the Lord. Your children will return to their own land. So when the reader of the gospel reads just the words of the gospel, it sounds very sad. But if he knows how the chapter continues, and I guess that the writers of the gospel assumed that the early Christians, and hopefully all Christians even today, know how the chapter continues. They know that although she's mourning now because the Holy Family had to escape from Bethlehem after Jesus was born, they will be back. And when they will be back, there will be a redemption, there will be salvation. And the chapter continues because that's the same chapter where Jeremiah the prophet talks about a new covenant that is not written on the stone, but a covenant that is written on their heart. So going toward Bethlehem, passing near the tomb of Rachel, is not a place to cry, to be sad, because there's always a hope. There's always something to come to follow the tears. There's mourning, but after that, there's hope. There's salvation. They return. So we passing near the tomb of Rachel, and we remember that she cried, but she could also see the people coming back to their land. And we passing through the fields of Bethlehem. Today, actually, you won't see really fields of wheat. We don't grow wheat in this area anymore. You will see a lot of houses, but you can imagine that 3,000 years ago, a little bit more, there were fields of wheat. And there was a woman there collecting, gathering the harvest with the Israelites there, with the Jews there. Her name was Ruth, and she was a Moabite woman. And she came there after she became a widow, and she looked for a husband, and she worked with all the men, and she found Boaz, and she married to him. And we remember that following this marriage, they were the parents of Obed, and Obed was the father of Jesse, who was the father of King David. So actually, Ruth was the great-grandmother of King David, and she was a Moabite woman. And you always wonder about this story in the fields of Bethlehem. How come a Moabite woman was the great-grandmother of King David? Because in the book of Deuteronomy, God says clearly, Moabites and Ammonites should not be assembled with, should not be integrated and with the Israelites. Actually, for 10th generation, you should not get together. You should not enter the assembly of. They should not enter the assembly of the Lord. They should not get together with Israelis. So how come a Moabite woman got married with a Jewish man, and their great grandson is King David? And I always think about it in the context of the story of Bethlehem, because from the story of Bethlehem, we will see that there's a message that goes not only to the Jews and to the Israelites, it's a message that goes to all the world, to all people, to the whole universe. So this is kind of an early hint that from Bethlehem, there's a universal message that goes beyond the Jewish people and the Israelites. And Ruth is mentioned in the Jewish tradition as a woman of chesed, a woman of kindness, a woman of grace. So although she was a Moabite, she got married to a Jew, she got to be the great grandmother of King David, and she was there in the fields of Bethlehem, three generations before King David. Talking about King David, actually, we will not mention, we're just going to jump over his father's tomb, Jesse, who was actually, his tomb is mentioned in Hebron, not in Bethlehem. But as Isaiah says, a shoot will come from the stump of Jesse and the branch shall grow out of his roots. And that would be, according to Christian understanding of Isaiah, that would be Jesus, who would be full of the faith of God, who would be full of God, who would bring the world to this ideal peace that the wolf would sit with the sheep and people would love each other and be together. But if we continue to talk about his son, about King David, we read a story in the book of Samuel, and this is a very interesting story because Samuel gets to Bethlehem to look for someone that should inherit Saul. Now, Saul did a mistake. He didn't follow the instructions of God, and Samuel was very disappointed. So God sent him to look for another king. And he sent him to Jesse from Bethlehem and tell him one of his sons will be the next king. And Samuel gets to Bethlehem, and God tells him, don't look at the appearance, don't look at the height of the person, don't look at what's outside is not, the outward appearance is not what's important, because God looks at the heart, which is a beautiful sentence. I love it, because how many times do I have to remind myself, don't look at the outward appearance, don't look at the way things they are, but there's always something deeper. And then he examined all the boys of Jesse, and when they get to the last one, so Jesse said, well, that's it. I mean, there is another one, there's the youngest one, Jesse answered, and he's tending the sheep, he's now with the sheep. And Samuel said, no, send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives. So he sent for him, and he had him brought in, and he was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, rise and anoint him. And that was David. And David was the small one. He was playing, he was taking care of the sheep. Jesse didn't even think to invite him. But that's the thing, from the youngest one, from the one that you do not expect to be the king, he is the king. And in that context, we have to read the book of Micah that, again, quoted in the text of the Nativity, when the three Magi's come to Herod and ask, where should we look for the king of the Jews? Because we have seen the star, we saw it in the stars that we have to look for him. Where is he? And King Herod consult with the scribes and the priests, and he said, well, he should be in Bethlehem, because it said in the book of Micah, but you, Bethlehem Ephratah, for you are small amongst the clan of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be the ruler over Israel. This is not the exact quote in the gospel, but this is the quote from Micah. Again, the ruler would come from a clan of Judah, from a small clan of Judah, and he would be the youngest, he would be the small among the clan of Judah, and he would be the ruler. And that's another sentence that, again, it does not appear in the gospel, but I think it's very meaningful for our story, because the region are from ancient times. This is not someone new. This is someone that was there for a long time. He was discovered now, but he was there the whole time. And the story continues there. Therefore, Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor bears a son, and rest of his brothers return and join to the Israelites, and so on. So thinking about Samuel, going to look for David, the youngest, the smallest, the less expected, reading the book of the prophecy of Micah, talking about the small among the clans of Judah, out of him that would be the ruler over Israel. And that's what we have in mind when we get to the place of Nativity. Because the place of Nativity, the Church of Nativity, yes, it's a big church, but we have to remember that when Jesus was born there, it was not a church. It was not a magnificent building. It was actually a very small and simple place. Actually, when the parents, Mary and Joseph, came to Bethlehem, they didn't find a place. There was no room in the inn, but maybe the word inn is not really give you the feeling of how things look like in the time of Jesus, because it's not like they went from one hotel to the other. Like when you will arrive in Bethlehem today, you'll have many possibilities to stay in different hotels. But that was not the situation in the time of Jesus, because the city was a very small city. They didn't have hotels there. They have houses, and people stayed with the family. And actually the word in Greek that the text is using is not padochion, which means an inn, but actually katalima, which means a place to put your stuff, or a resting place that appears in other places in the Bible in the same context, a place where you stay, not necessarily a hotel, not necessarily an inn. So it's not like they were searching for hotels. They didn't go from one hotel to the other, but they came to the family, probably the family of Joseph in Bethlehem, and they looked for a place to stay. And they didn't have a place in their house, in their guest room with the family. So they had to compromise and stay downstairs with the animals, which could be kind of a cave. Actually, the gospel don't say a cave. Now we're going to see if it was a cave or not, but the gospel don't say cave. But by the 3rd century, everyone was talking about a cave. The word katalima appears only once again in the Gospel of Luke in the context of the Last Supper. In the nativity scene, there was no place in the katalima. But when Jesus sent his disciples to look for a place to have the Passover meal, they do find a place. There is a place in the katalima. In the Gospel according to Luke 22, when they go and search for the place where they will celebrate the Passover, they tell to the person they meet, the teacher says, where is the guest room? Where is the katalima where we are going to have our Passover meal? So there's no place in the katalima. There's place in the katalima toward the end of the story where they're having the Last Supper. So this is the katalima. This is the room of the Last Supper. Of course, it's not the original room of the Last Supper. It's a building from the Middle Ages, but you can visit that when you visit Jerusalem and Mount Zion in Jerusalem. But if you want to look how Katalima looked like in the time of Jesus, it would be something more similar to the picture you see to your left. So there were houses with 2 floors. Maybe the first floor was kind of a cave. Maybe it wasn't, but that's where you have the oven and the stables for the animals. And that's where you cooked and you washed your clothes and you worked. And then at night, everyone went up to the 2nd floor to sleep in the 2nd floor, while the animals stayed in the 1st floor. And since the upper floor was full, because there were so many people coming for the census, the Holy Family stayed in the 1st floor with the animal. And when the baby was born, they put him in the manger. So let's enter the church now. And when we enter the church, is something that I really like, how history is giving an extra meaning. So originally the entrance to the church was a very wide door, like the door you see over here, if you follow my arrow. But later on, it was sealed and only a smaller door was opened, and it's shaped like a pointed arch. And that was in the Crusader time in the Middle Ages. And later on in the Muslim time, the Christian even made a smaller door to make sure that the Muslim would not enter the church with horses. And therefore, when you enter the church, you have to bow down and enter the church. And therefore, people call the door of humility. So when you enter, you kind of humble yourself in front of God. And that's me coming out of this door last Tuesday. We entered the church, and it's a very, very impressive church. It was actually built in the 4th century by the Emperor Constantine. He is the emperor who changed the world, who gave freedom of religion to Christians, who stopped persecuting Christians in Rome and around the Roman Empire. And he's the one to build the first churches in the Holy Land. The first church he built was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And then his mother, how important mothers are. His mother built 3 other churches. One of them, she is the cave. And already then in the 4th century, they're talking about a cave. She found the cave where it's believed to be the place where Jesus was born. And she built a church over that, which her son, the emperor, decorated with more silver and expensive stone. The mosaic you see here was just discovered 100 years ago. It's below the church level, and it's a beautiful mosaic, magnificent mosaic from the 4th century. So it's 1700 years old, still can be seen in the Church of Nativity. You can see how they excavated it. It's actually almost a meter below the ground level of today's church. The church was destroyed by the Samaritans in the 6th century and rebuilt again. And the church we are going to visit today is actually the church from the 6th century. It's the church that was built by the Emperor Justinian in the middle of the 6th century. And it's quite amazing because this is the oldest church that's still standing in Jerusalem 1,500 years later, 1,500 years after it was built. The same church appears in a map from the 6th century, a map that was built on the floor of a church in Jordan, in today's Jordan. And you can see the church of Bethlehem. If you read Greek, it says Bethlehem. And below that, it says Ramah. A voice was heard in Ramah. So for the Christian, and the word here on the left is Ephrata. So for the Christians, connecting Bethlehem with the place where Rachel was buried, with the word Ephrata that appears in the book of Genesis and in the book of Jeremiah, is very important to connect it, that there's a weeping, there's a mourning, but there's a return, there's salvation, and it comes from Bethlehem, Ephrata. So that's how the church looks like today. Again, it's 1,500 years old. It's still standing. We don't have churches so old in Jerusalem. We have churches that were rebuilt later, but this one is still standing from the 6th century. It was lately renovated, so it's quite impressive. Below the level, the floor level, you can see the mosaic from the 4th century, the mosaic I just showed you. And we will continue in the church, and we're going to go down below the church to visit, these are all photos of the church, to visit the cave of the Nativity. So we're going down from here, and let's walk downstairs. Oh, wait. I don't, that should probably be okay. We're going to walk now downstairs toward the cave of the Nativity. This is me walking with the camera. So we're going down to the cave. It's empty these days, but usually it's very crowded with tourists. So you see the place of Nativity, very few tourists, and the place of the manger. Okay, and that would be the place of Nativity. Now it's really hard to imagine a cave, a place where animal lives under a house, when you have all this decoration and oil lamps and icons and curtains covering. So you will have to use your imagination, but it's all being built over that. But when pilgrims come, they get closer, especially to the star in the center. And this place commemorates the birthplace of Jesus, with the star with 14 points, with all this light filling up the place. And of course, we're talking about a feast of light. We're talking about Nativity, which symbolized by light. So having all these candles burning around the place of Nativity is obviously very meaningful. So this is the spot that commemorates the birthplace of Jesus, the Nativity of Jesus. And when we look around, we turn our face to the other side, we can see the place of the manger. So after they gave birth, she gave birth to Jesus, she wrapped him and she put him in the manger where the animal have their food, which is always surprising. I mean, how come someone who's supposed to save the world was actually born in a cave with the animals, and then they put him, the first resting place of the little baby. I mean, usually you put it in a very soft cradle. No, his cradle was a manger with maybe some leftovers from the food of the animals. But again, it goes back to what Micah said in the prophecy. It goes back to the story of Samuel. Yes, the Savior does not have to come from a wealthy, big, famous family. He doesn't have to be born in a fancy hospital or fancy hotel. He can be born in a simple cave, and he can be placed in a manger, in a place with the animals. And he would be the person who will save the world. And I always think about it as a very meaningful lesson for me as a person, that you should never judge a person by his background, by his appearance, by the place where he comes from, because you never know what will come out from the individuals. You can never know what will come out from a child who grew up in a poor family, in slums, with no education. Who knows? Maybe he's going to be the next Albert Einstein. I don't know. But don't judge a person by all these outward appearances, by his background, because even Jesus was born in a cave with the animals because they didn't have a place in the Catalina, and he was placed in the manger. Then the angels, in the gospel according to Luke, the angels invited the shepherds to come and greet and bless the baby that was born in Bethlehem. And we're going to go now outside of the city to look for the shepherds. So until today, you can find in the fields shepherd's cave. Usually today, shepherds do not stay in the caves, but when they take out the sheep, they flock, during the day, maybe they find shelters in one of these caves. But in the past, when the shepherds went for a few weeks, a few months outside from the cities and stayed with the sheep outside, with the flock outside, they probably stayed in these kind of caves. So here are examples for caves that you can still see around Bethlehem. Again, not being used on daily basis, but once in a while, for a short time, it is used by shepherds you can see around. And the angels, they come they look for the shepherds, they invite them, they call them to come to Bethlehem to look for the child. And actually, there is a site in a nearby place, not in Bethlehem itself, but just about 1 kilometer from Bethlehem. It's a village called Bethlehem today. And there, in the 6th century, we already know of a cave and a place that was identified as the shepherd's field, the place where these particular shepherds stayed during the night when Jesus was born. So already in the 6th century, we hear from visitors, from pilgrims, that they visited the monastery of the flock. And today there's a church there. You can still see some of the remnants of the church. And I think what's amazing about the site, the shepherd's field in Bethlehem, is that you can also see the surroundings. It's not inside the city, it's the outskirts of the village of Bethlehem. And you can really feel that you are in the field and get this experience of being with the angels at night when they receive this message, this invitation to go to Bethlehem. So here you can see some remnants of the old monastery that was there on the site of the shepherd's field 1500 years ago. And then, of course, there's also a modern church, which I really like because it looks like a shepherd's cave, but it's, of course, a modern church. Now, some fathers of the church, some writers, Christian writers and theologians from the early church suggest that the shepherd's field is actually Migdal Eder, the Tower of the Flock, a place that is mentioned in the book of Genesis. So we said that Jacob went after he buried Rachel, he moved toward Alone Mamre, and he put his tent, he pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder. And we wondered, what is this Migdal Eder? What is this? Migdal means tower in Hebrew, and Eder means flock. So what is this Migdal Eder? And actually in the Jewish tradition, in the Mishnah, text from the 2nd century, they mentioned that there is a place called Migdal Eder, which is probably somewhere not far from Jerusalem. And maybe it's a tower where you can watch the sheep in the surroundings. And it says that if you find an animal, if you find a sheep or a goat, somewhere between Jerusalem and Migdal Eder, if it's a male, it's probably a sheep that was supposed to be brought as an offering to the temple. It's a burnt offering, Korban Olah. If it's a female, it's a peace offering, which is Korban Shlamim. But there is an interesting discussion there. And in this discussion, in the Mishnah, in this discussion between rabbis in the 2nd century, they said that if it's just about Passover, it's about 30 days before the Feast of Passover, and you find a goat somewhere between Jerusalem and Migdal Eder, and it's an animal, a lamb that is fitting for the offering of Passover. So there's a specific offering, there's a specific sacrifice you bring for Passover. Then if it's around Passover time, then probably this lamb, this sheep is supposed to be brought and sacrificed for Passover. And again, connecting Migdal Eder with the shepherd's field, with the Passover lamb, which will be sacrificed in Passover, and of course connect this to the sacrifice of Jesus. It's interesting to make this connection, which is made by scholars, by the fathers of the church already in the 4th century. They suggested that Migdal Eder is actually the place where the angel appeared to the shepherds. We continue in the church and we get to this cave. And I always wonder about it because there are 2 places that commemorate the innocent. So in the gospel according to Matthew, after the Magi's brought the gifts, the presents to Jesus, they left. They didn't go back to Herod to tell him where they found the Messiah because they realized that it would be risky, and Herod is not about to appreciate and admire the baby, but he wants to kill him. So they escaped back to wherever they were coming from. And King Herod was so upset and worried from this new Messiah, this new king, this new ruler who might threaten his authority, that he gave an order to kill all the babies under the age of 2. And the Holy Family, Jesus' family, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, thanks to the dream that Joseph had, escaped to Egypt. But there were a lot of other babies who were slaughtered in Bethlehem. And when in the church they want to commemorate these innocents and to remember them, there are 2 different chapels doing that. One chapel to the left is a tomb. It's a burial cave from the time of Jesus. It's a burial cave from the 2nd temple period. And you see these little niches where they used to put the bodies. Of course, it's empty now. And on the right side, it's another chapel where they actually have lots of bones. Obviously, you look at the bones and you can easily recognize that we're not talking about bones of babies, but of adults. But just having bones there, it immediately makes you feel like, oh, there's so many dead people here. So it's not just to tell you a lot of people died, but it's also to show you all these skulls and bones, and to make your heart miss a bit for a second, in order to commemorate a lot of people who are innocent and die. And I always take this as an opportunity to remember not only those innocent people who died, but a lot of innocent people around the world who die for different reasons, for war, for different unacceptable reasons. So these are the 2 chapels, 2 different chapels of the innocents. Now, in the Church of the Nativity, there's another opportunity. There's also an opportunity for encounter between East and West. Now, I assume that many of you come from the Western world. You're coming from Western churches, But here in the Middle East, the majority of the Christians belong to Eastern churches, Greek Orthodox, Armenian, Syria, Copts, Ethiopians. And this is really a place of encounter. And I really love to see the Holy Land as a place of encounter between people. And not only today, but also in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, Catholic came from Europe and occupied the Holy Land and established a kingdom here and renovated the church. But since they had good relations, at least toward the end of the 12th century, with the Eastern churches, they worked together to renovate this church. So we have Western funding and Western content. Everything here is talking about Western heritage, and many things are written in Latin, but the style is very, very Eastern. And the church is decorated with beautiful mosaic. This is all mosaic. It's all 850 years old, with the scenes, with a story, the Passion of Christ. Here you see Doubting Thomas, for example, and it's all decorating the church. Not everything survived, but it's part of the decoration of the church. So it's not just decoration that was made by Christian 800 years ago, but it also shows this collaboration between East and West. And this collaboration between East and West is something that is quite unique, at least in the Middle Ages, to the Middle East. Here, East and West get together. So here you see they just renovated it with, they had a big project to conserve the mosaics, and actually they also found a new angel, and there's nothing happier than finding a new angel that was covered with layers of plaster for many, many years. And during this renovation, they found that there's actually another angel decorating the Church of Nativity. Okay, we're going to go out of the church, but as I said, the Holy Land is not just it's not homogeneically, the Christian communities are not homogenic, because there are many Christians here, Eastern churches and Western churches. And we just visited the church, and just by the colors, I want you to get the idea that this church is actually shared by different denominations, Christian denominations, Armenian, Catholic, Orthodox, Syriac, Copts, they're all sharing the same space. Certain parts of the church belong to different communities, and they have certain schedule, who prays where and when, who renovates what and where. And this is quite unique. There are a couple of places in the Holy Land where different churches sharing this space. And it's due to historical reason. It's not like an ideal situation. Not everyone loves it, but that's kind of a reality here that is now preserved, and they're sharing it. And again, I will give you an example. So when we talk about, who celebrates Christmas and when, here we have to remember that we having different churches here, and different churches here have different calendars. So obviously on the 25th, next Friday night, on the eve of 25th of December, the Catholics and Protestant will not celebrate in the Church of Nativity, but nearby they would celebrate Christmas. So the Western churches celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December. But in the Holy Land, we have many churches who follow an old calendar, and they are 13 days behind our calendar, and they will celebrate they will celebrate Christmas on the 7th of January. So again, there will be a Christmas celebration on the 7th of January in the Church of Nativity. And there will be also Coptic Christian from Egypt and Syriac Christian who still speak Aramaic, the language of Jesus, until today. They would celebrate on the 7th of January. And not only 2 Christmases in the Holy Land, but actually 3 Christmases in the Holy Land, because on the 19th of January, actually the Feast of Epiphany, according to the old calendar, so 6th of January, 13 days later, the Armenian, they still celebrate Christmas on Epiphany Day, because they say that there's no reason to celebrate the human nativity and the divine birth of Jesus, but you should celebrate them together. So they celebrate the birth, the human birth, and the divine epiphany on the same day, on the 19th of January, which is 6th of January, according to their calendar. If you're totally confused, absolutely fine. Everyone is confused. But hey, we can celebrate Christmas here in the Holy Land for 2 months, so no one complains. You can have Christmas tree and Santa Claus coming until the end of January, and everyone is happy to celebrate 3 Christmases. So it's absolutely fine. And when you go outside of the church, you'll visit Manger Square, which is the place where people gather before Christmas, when pilgrims gather around Christmas time. And these days, when the city is empty and there are no pilgrims in the city, and the tour guides, as Nicole said, are unemployed, and the shops are closed, the one who fill up the churches are the local Christians. And it again reminds everyone how important to maintain the Christian communities in the Holy Land. They actually remind everyone that they are the living stones, as Peter said in the first letter in chapter 2. They say we are the living stone. The living stones are being built into a spiritual house to be the holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices accepted to God through Jesus Christ. So the living stones, they are the stones they're building the community, the spiritual house. And without them, we will have empty churches. And I think it was very, very clear during these 2 years of COVID, when there were no tourists at all in the Holy Land, the churches were still full of people. They were all the local Christians. Without them, next time in your visit, you will visit a museum of holy places and not a vivid, active churches. So for them, it's very important to stay in the Holy Land and to preserve their presence in the Holy Land, being the living stones of the Holy Land. Make sure that the Holy Land is not just a museum of holy places. And they have a very important role during Christmas time, because they get together before Christmas. The scouts actually come from all over the country, and they, I need to share again with the sound, because I want you to hear for a second. On Christmas Eve. So here, so all the scouts come from all over the Holy Land. These are Christian scouts, and you see not just the young people, but also adults. They play the traditional instrument of the Holy Land, the bagpipe. No, it's not traditional. It's adopted from England. They play the drum. They go around the city. The people come from all over the world to see this procession for 2 hours. Different groups of scouts with their children, adults playing with their uniform. These are the Syriac scouts from the Syriac church, the Aramaic church. This is another group, they're Catholic. And it goes on, and it goes on like this for a few hours before Christmas Eve, on Christmas Eve. And now we continue with the tour and do some shopping. I guess you all like to do some shopping. So we're going to see some of the traditional crafts that you can get in Bethlehem. We will start with the olive wood factory, where they're making the nativity scene, which is very, very traditional to Bethlehem. To have a nativity scene made of olive wood, and you can see the parents, and you can see the kings, and you can see the shepherds, and you can see baby and the baby Jesus, and you can see the sheep, and you can see the star. But in many of the nativity scenes made of olive wood, you will also have a palm tree. And I've just heard an explanation for that, which is quite fascinating, that actually there's no mention of of palm tree in the story of the gospel. So why they always make a palm tree next to the nativity scene? Actually, it's probably connected to the Quran, the holy scripture of the Muslims. In the Quran, the story of the nativity is mentioned. It's a very different story, but it's also mentioned that Maryam, gave birth to a baby. And when she went to Bethlehem with her husband Joseph, she was very tired. She was in the 9th month and she couldn't walk, so she rested. and she could hardly walk toward Bethlehem, and she was thirsty and hungry, and her husband was rushing her. No, let's move on to Bethlehem. Let's go. We have to be there on time. And then she saw a palm tree, but she couldn't get to the fruit because it was too high. And then the palm tree bowed toward her, and she managed to take a date, and she ate that. And because this story appears in the nativity scene of the Quran of the Muslims, because the Muslims familiar with this story from the Quran, that's how the Christian and the Muslim who work in the olive wood factories present the nativity scene when they make it out of olive wood. So next time you see olive wood nativity scene, check if there's a nativity, if there's a palm tree next to the Holy Family. And just to conclude with some photos from Christmas atmosphere in the Holy Land. So this is a photo from Haifa, a mixed city where you have Jews, Christian, and Muslim living together. And they also decorate not just the Christmas tree, but also they put the symbols of the other religions. And Bethlehem, of course, in better years, when there are a lot of people in Manger Square. And Nazareth decorated beautifully, welcoming tourists and locals. Jerusalem, of course. Me'ilia, an Arab Christian village in the Galilee. Jaffa, again, a mixed city with Arab, Jews, Christian, Muslim, and Jews. And they also have a big Christmas tree in the center of the city. And this is the Jerusalem Santa. So this is Isa Kassisian, who is a Jerusalemite, who's actually a basketball player. And about 15 years ago, he realized that there's one thing that Jerusalem is lacking, and that's Santa Claus. So he did a Santa Claus course and turned his whole house into a Santa's house. And every year, a month before Christmas, he hosts people in his house and give them gifts, give the children gifts and chocolates, and allow them to take a picture with him. And in between, he goes around Jerusalem riding a camel because he's the Jerusalem Santa. And as I said, he doesn't finish his job by the 26th of December, because in Jerusalem we have 3 Christmases. So actually he appears as Santa until the end of January. So from Jerusalem, we greet you with Merry Christmas. Okay, and Joseph.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. Okay,
sure
so thank you so much, Hannah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Hannah.
I was going to say, yeah, I was just going to say, I'm sure we have some questions, but first to you, Joseph, before we go back to Hannah.
Okay. Thank you again for joining us. And again, thank you, Hannah, Elisa, for the great tour of the nativity scene of the Nativity Trail. So again, I'm Joseph McGinn from All Israel News, the managing editor. And Nicole, if she's going to join us, she's the news editor. So here's Nicole. So I'll add you on the spotlight. So yeah, so I just want to thank you all for the tour. And this was a free tour. And as you know, I believe it's an article that Nicole wrote about the situation in the tourism. For those who didn't read what's happening or don't know about the tourism, Nicole, can you explain what's happening in the tourism sector here?
Yes, I can. I mean, I know Elisa and Hannah would be even more qualified, but I've spoken to Elisa at length about this, and also others. Unfortunately, Israel has taken a very strict approach to the coronavirus, yes, to protect its own citizens, but the country's been closed more or less most of the time since March 2020. So tourists are not able to get in. And when they were able, it was a very short spells of time under very strict conditions. And I covered last week a protest by the tour, not just tour guides, anybody involved in the tourism industry. There were tour guides, there were hotel owners, owners of companies, tour companies, shop owners who haven't been able to sell, one little olive wood Christmas decoration, as Hannah just talked about. And it's very sad, and they're struggling, and also they're not being compensated at the moment. actually just uploaded a podcast, my weekly podcast, and really I thought at the end that the best Christmas present that you can give this year is to just pray for these people and just pray for a solution for them, that they can be able to help their families and make a living. So it's a very complicated situation. Of course, there's a lot of politics involved, but I really felt the pain and frustration of these people who've been, for almost 2 years suffering. And so anyway, it touched me deeply, and I, tried to express that in our articles. So unfortunately now I can't even hazard a guess, but nobody will be coming back to Israel in 2021. I can say we'll definitely finish out the year without tourism. And don't know, at what point they'll be back. So I'm sorry for that dismal message, but I think that's the most realistic at the moment. And anyway, I hope that you guys got a glimpse into what we're seeing here. And yes, it's true. The indigenous Christians, is that the word? The Christians who are born and raised here, like also my husband, this is a really special time for us to be here as Christians and to really experience the land and all of the biblical connections. So I really also appreciated this tour, from a personal point of view. So anyway.
Yeah, so thank you, Nicole. So along that note, here's your opportunity to make a difference. As Nicole said, it is extremely hard, next to impossible for many people in the travel industry and tourism industry, especially tour guides, to make a living during this time. Even so, that our foreign minister recently said that tour guides should get a new job. They should get a new career. They said they should switch jobs.
And travel companies.
And travel companies. So that is extremely hurtful for those who have studied and are licensed and have spent years and years serving Christian and Jewish tourists in Israel. And so here's an opportunity as All Israel News, as the evangelical community of readers around the world, to stand with Israel, to stand with the tourism industry in Israel, and those who have the means and the heart to want to make we'll call it a love gift or a tip. If you're on a physical tour in Israel and you're on a bus and you go off the bus, usually there's a tip jar, which you can tip the driver and tip the tour guide, and that's the lion's share of their income. And so in the virtual tour that we're doing, we want to kind of virtually emulate that. So I'm going to share my screen and show you how you can do that. And we'll also share it in the chat. So you can go to paypal.com/paypalme/Traveluja with the J, and then click the send button. If you have a QR reader, you can scan that QR and it should go right there. If you don't have PayPal and would like to give by credit card, you can go to our donate site, and you can donate and make a note, I think by email, admin@allisrael.com. Just say I've given a gift, whether it's $10 or $25 or $50 towards Traveluja and towards this tour. If you don't have PayPal, if you have PayPal, you can just use the link. And if you don't have PayPal and you want to use a credit card, you can go to allisrael.com/donate. Likewise, if you stand with us in our vision to mobilize the evangelical Christian community as a media site and a media vision, with all the fake news and anti-Israel bias out there. Joel Rosenberg, myself, Nicole, and our staff here in Israel, and also All Arab News. Then please stand with us and support. We're a reader supported website. So we want to expand. We have we want more content, we're starting podcasts, and Nicole has a podcast called Headlines from Jerusalem that has had several episodes so far. So please sign up and subscribe to her podcast. If you can share a link in the show notes, or not in the show notes, in the chat. Please sign up for our email updates. We send out about 3 updates each week, and lots of good content, so you can go directly to your inbox for free. And I just want to give a plug for what's coming up in a couple months. We're going to have a new site called All Israel Tours, of which are going to be a collection of virtual tours and physical tours and live events. And you'll be able to search and easily search and find, and some will be free, some will be paid. If you think of the Airbnb idea, where you have different people with rooms and different people looking for rooms, and they're a matchmaking site, that's what we're trying to do for the tourism industry, to help do more virtual tours, and when there are physical tours, to make those connections too. So I'm going to go back for those who didn't see this or didn't write it down. So again, to give a love gift and support as a Christmas gift, we'll say, in this Christmas season of giving. It's always better to give than receive. So PayPal to Traveluia. So thank you again. I believe we're going to have questions and answers now. And you can write in the chat group. So thank you for your support.
So please, if you have a question, please write it into the chat. Joseph, thank you. And Nicole, thank you too. And I'm going to put my information here in the chat as well. If anybody has any questions about customizing an Israel tour for your church or Bible study group or whatever, or your synagogue or your Christian organization or ministry, I'm happy to help. Hopefully the borders will open soon. And let me see if any questions in here. I know somebody had asked about Migdal Emer, where it was in Genesis, but that question was answered. I think Miriam had that question earlier. There may very well be a few other questions. Let's see.
I just want to say that,
Sure.
when you think in the Jerusalem perspective, we have here, a crisis for 2 years with no pilgrims, it's not just the industry, it's also the Christians who have no opportunity to come here. I can see so many people who visited and have good memories from being in the Holy Land, and my heart is with them that cannot come again now. So it's not just the industry, but it also the religious feeling. But I'm saying it's only 2 years. I mean, this Holy Land is Holy Land for 3,000 years, and 2,000 years Christian pilgrims come here. So 2 years, it's nothing in a wider perspective. So we will go through that, and borders will be open, and everything will be recovered, and all of you will be able to come and visit the Holy Land again. So yeah, it's just a matter of time and patience and prayers as well, I guess, and hope that the vaccination will do its work.
I sure hope so, Hannah. It has only been 2 years, but it's been 2 very long years.
It feels long.
Now, not having one tour. Yep.
Yeah.
We had one group in November, and then it shut down. So we're cautiously optimistic as we have to be.
Yeah.
Is there a central registry for all guides, especially concerned about families? No, I mean there's a tour guide. There's a tour guide website, but I'm not sure about the question there. Especially concerned about families. Oh, as far as making a donation
by ways of helping families, is that the question?
Yeah, that was Stuart and Janet had that question.
Helping families of tour guide.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I don't know that there is anything that exists. I had spoken to some people out there, and they said that they are going to start a fund because it's a sad situation. People compensation or unemployment was cut off several months ago for tour guides, and then depending on their age, and then last month for all tour guides. So they're wondering how to make it ends meet, and so if there is something I can tell you, I will write an article about it, and I will include a link. But do you guys know anything at the moment?
No.
Okay. How can my friend watch this virtual
Hopefully as
nativity
part,
tour?
go ahead.
We will probably repost it on our website. Ooh, how is the post-Netanyahu era different than the political environment under Bibi regarding tourism? Any difference in the approach to tourist sites? Elisa and Hannah, do you have an observation on that?
Yeah, I'll just answer the previous question. This will be posted on our YouTube channel, and we will send an email to everyone who signed up with a link to the YouTube video.
So far, I can't say that there's been a dramatic difference between the two administrations towards their outlook on tourism. Tourism is was a very, very big part of our economy. I think 25% of people were employed somehow in the tourism sector. So many services that are provided to tourists, restaurants, and people here have asked about retailers and shops and hotels. And also, the Daniel sailing boat and the Holy Land sailing boat. I mean, all of those things are all part of our touristic economy. And as far as the policies, it's been the same. Depends, with both administrations. So, everybody claims to be very supportive. I don't want to come down on the government, but it's for incoming tourism. It has been a terrible challenge to keep things going. I mean, they're not going. Incoming tourism does not exist at the present time and has not existed since March. There were maybe a couple thousand people who might have, come in each month from June, July, August, and September. That's nothing. I mean, we had in 2019, we had 4.5 million people. About a little over 3 million of them were Christians coming here. What's 15,000 over the course of 21 months? It's nothing. I mean, and this is like a generation of people. I mean, especially students and others who will just never get that chance to come. Because maybe they were coming with schools or people who have planned their tours and maybe, God forbid, they're not healthy next year. They had to cancel. I mean, there's so many. It's a very sad situation. It's sad for the people who wanted to come, and it's obviously sad for those of us in the industry who are unable to do what we love to do in the way that we love to do it. So we try to find other ways to connect people to Israel.
I have a political observation. It does seem like the Ministry of Tourism has a very weak lobby. And I don't necessarily know if it's connected to the previous administration. I mean, Netanyahu was in power for 12 years. So under him, tourism did see better days, and perhaps, just because you had a record year in 2019. So tourism had seen better days, but I can't say that the current government, it's too early to tell, and the circumstances are too challenging to tell whether this government will, when it can, place tourism and give it the backing and the strength that it needs. But currently, I would say it doesn't have a strong lobby, it doesn't have strong backing or a strong ministry at the moment.
It has the same lobby. It has the same administrators that it had under Netanyahu. Same people are running the tour, the Tour Operators Association, and the same people are running the Tour Guides Association. So that hasn't changed. I mean, COVID has been obviously the big change. We do have a new minister of tourism, but he seems to be very, proactive. But again, it's only been a few months, so it's hard to tell. And there are a lot of other people in the cabinet who can vote, no on incoming tourists, even if one person is voting for it. Other questions?
Yeah, but there was a question I see about, can even volunteers get visas at the moment? And if so, what fields?
So that's a very good question. I can tell you that sites like the Garden Tomb, which are so important to Christians of many different faiths, it's in Jerusalem, are actually closed right now. They closed last month because they don't have enough volunteers. The volunteers are unable to get visas. So it has been a problem. And of course, this goes back to COVID. But you see kind of like this whole, whatever you want to call it, the supply chain being impacted because of the pandemic. I live very close to the Sea of Galilee, very close to Capernaum, and very close to Peter's Primacy and Mount of Beatitudes. And those sites they're all closed on Sunday and Monday, and very limited hours on Tuesday, when the rest of the week, like an hour. You can go in only at a certain time up until 11:30. Again, they don't have a lot of people working there. There are not a lot of people visiting, but I think it's also a bit of a catch-20, somewhat of a catch-22. But yeah, there's no tour buses with people to frequent these sites. And each of these sites, as you know, for those of you who've been here, they all have little retail stores associated with them, and obviously those are all closed up. So no tourists, very difficult to get visas, and we're actually seeing important sites like the Garden Tomb closed. Now, groups can still go there. It all has to be specially arranged, and they're honoring all sorts of reservations. But again, they're only opening up for special, reservations, and that's really sad. You can't just walk in there anymore.
There's a question about Bethlehem.
Mm-hmm.
Bethlehem is under the jurisdiction of the Palestinians. As tensions rise and fall in that area, and as rockets sometimes are an issue, are the historical sites protected by the military from Israel? Well, I would say that there's, when there are rockets, the Iron Dome protects the whole country and the whole area. So definitely, Iron Dome shoots down missiles that would also fly over Bethlehem. So in that sense, yes, it's protected. But Bethlehem is also affected by Israel's decisions to close the borders, because there's no airport in Bethlehem or in the Palestinian areas. So the only way somebody can get to Bethlehem is by entering Israel. So their economy is suffering right alongside with the Israeli economy in terms of tourism.
What about those folks who have not been vaccinated? Are they allowed to travel to Israel? From Nancy.
So if you, first of all, at present time, nobody, it's pretty much closed up, but before we went into a closure to international tourists, everybody had to be vaccinated within 6 months, fully vaccinated within 6 months of their departure date from Israel, with no exceptions. And we'll see what that is, once we do reopen afterwards. But for the time being, it required 2 vaccinations that were up to date, and if they weren't up to date, then a booster. That was good. 14 days, but at least a minimum of 14 days before you came to Israel. Also a PCR test. Well, depending on the country, it could be 24 to 48 or 72 hours prior to arrival. And of course, a PCR test once you arrived in Israel, and you'd have to stay isolated until the results of that test, which were normally occurring, that same day or within 24 hours. So it really was not too intrusive on groups or individuals that were arriving, but we did have to plan, programs around that. I'll give you the address of the YouTube channel. It's right here.
Malcolm is asking, is Israel sending athletes to the Beijing Olympics? I believe the answer is yes. Israel always sends in the summer and winter Olympics. I don't see us boycotting China, as long as China doesn't boycott us or any other country boycotts us. We'll have an Olympic team as we did in the summer. We'll have one in the winter. And, Israel won how many gold medals this year in the summer? 2 gold medals in gymnastics and rhythmic gymnastics, right?
Rhythmic gymnastics.
Taekwondo, they got a medal.
Few, yeah.
Strom and yeah. So.
There was a question way back up about Bethlehem, where they sold nativities. And if you can elaborate on the shops in Bethlehem, maybe Hannah can elaborate on the shops in Bethlehem where they sell nativities, how they're doing. Are they safe? Are they functioning?
I was there on last Tuesday. Most of the shops were closed. The factories still produce nativities and produce olive wood little sculptures, and I guess they sell it online. But the shops are closed, and economically, it's a big problem for people who are involved in the tourism industry in Bethlehem as well. Unlike in Israel, they were not compensated like in Israel, where businesses were supported financially, at least for a year and a half by the government. They didn't get anything. So yes, it's very difficult for them. I would say more difficult than even in Israel. So it's the whole region that suffers from COVID and from the lack of tourism. It's not just one group, or it's cross border and cross nationalities and cross religions. Everyone suffers from the same thing.
Okay, Stuart and Janet said, how do you feel about birthright groups not coming? Birthright groups coming, but not Christians. Is that still the situation? Hannah, you're on mute.
So I hear a lot from the Christians here complaints that it doesn't make sense that birthright groups can come and Christian groups cannot come. I think the problem is that for many Israelis, birthright groups are not tourists, but they're educational program, and they're very important for the future of the relationship between Jews in the diaspora and Israel. But at the same time, I think they don't appreciate the connection of Christians around the world to the Holy Land. So they don't compare it, but Christians do compare it and say that's not fair. It's not tourism, it's not business, it's spirituality, it's religion, it's faith, it's connection. So they talked about allowing birthright group. I don't know if they really
if they step that back, yeah.
I don't know if there was that.
I'm not sure.
I don't know, but I do agree it's very problematic, and I think it's connected to the discussion we had about tourism in Israel. I think because of part of my work is educating Israelis about Christians and Christianity, and I think one of the problems we have is that we don't understand enough the Christians' feelings toward the Holy Land. I mean, those of us who work in tourism, we understand that. That's part of our daily work. But for someone who sit in the office, who do other things that are not connected to Christian, they don't understand that millions of people eager to be in the Holy Land and to experience the holy places. And it's not just a touristic experience. It's not like going and sitting on the beach in, I don't know, in India. It's being in the Holy Land. So they don't realize that it's a very meaningful thing. It's not just vacation. So therefore, I think it is problematic that if they would allow only birthright and not Christian groups. I hope that we'll not have to be in this situation that they would say this is allowed and this is not, but they would just open the borders for everyone who is vaccinated to just visit the places. Yeah.
Nicole, do you have any comment about the article you wrote about the birthright versus the Christians?
Yeah. I posted a link, and then you can also find out what Elisa thought about it, because I interviewed her. Her comments were also in the article. So I think Israelis were just as shocked. I think shock was the best word that when the news came out. So it sounds unfair, and it sounds like so a quick explanation of what is birthright tourism. I believe it's bringing young Jewish babies in their teens to 20s to come to Israel to learn more about Judaism, etc. Do you want to explain it better, Elisa or Hannah?
Basically, it's a tour it's a free tour that is offered by Birthright Foundation. I think the government does support it to some extent, maybe a limited extent. Mostly offered to college students, and actually now up until the age of 30, who have either one parent or even grandparent who is Jewish. And the idea behind the program is that it will help to educate Jews about their Jewish identity and try to keep that alive. If you follow any of the news in the certainly in the United States, and I'm sure in other parts of the world, that there is concern within the Jewish community that there's a lot of assimilation. So birthright was kind of like developed as a hopeful kind of antidote for assimilation that would, help people meet, understand their identity and connect with other Jews and hopefully marry somebody who's Jewish. So that was the concept, big picture. And as far as this policy goes, look, I think people are real. I think people in the industry, but I think a lot of Israelis, when they hear about this policy and they really think about it, are very angered by it because it is, it is truly unfair. It truly goes against Israel's interests, and certainly, I think it only helps our detractors come up with more, ammunition of, why they are why they are feeling what they're feeling and why they're anti-Israel. And I think that it's I think it can be a very dangerous policy. I think these students could potentially go back on campus and instead of talking about how great their trips are, and talking and being, positive ambassadors will, could possibly be faced with the question of, well, you went to Israel on a, possibly a discriminatory policy. So, and they'll have to defend that. And I think there's so many things that are just horrible about that. And I do hope that they step that back. And, I think you allow one, you allow them all, you allow everybody equally and fairly. That's the way it should be. We are a democracy. I don't think it was thought out. I don't think anybody purposely came up with this kind of a policy. I think that maybe they were answering to, who knows, donors or whatever, pressure, but it wasn't thought out. And hopefully it'll be walked back soon.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
There's a few, Israel has to be very careful right now because while they still want to support what little remains of the tourism industry, this is at least the third incident of a, huge double standard that's gone on. To say we're shutting the borders because we're worried about Omicron and yet still letting certain groups in, and then also still letting the Miss Universe pageant go on, which was a mega $1 million event for Israel. So it was good for Israel. It would have looked horrible if they canceled it, but still. And also the prime minister's family flying overseas after the prime minister told Israelis not to. So, anyway, so that's, more or less, Israel has to be careful. I think none of this is done with ill intent, but there are a lot of people sitting back and asking very serious questions. Sorry, I always get political on these things because that's my work. So I should let the tour people lead here.
Any other questions about Bethlehem or any other possible stops along the Nativity Trail? I know we were going to mention Nazareth, but we just had so much content. If anybody has any questions, please put it into the chat.
Another tour for the Galilee tour.
Yes.
Epiphany.
The next one we could do.
Yeah.
Okay, going once, going twice. Any more questions? Hopefully we'll, like I said, we'll have this video on YouTube. We'll send the link. Hopefully we'll be sending you more tours in 2022. And we'll have hopefully the platform bookings.allisrael.com, which will include tours, but not just tours. It will include live events, concerts, webinars, online courses, basically anything that you can book. It'll also be a speakers bureau, so different speakers in Israel, as well as evangelical Christian speakers outside of Israel. They'll be speaking and really, to invite to your physical meeting, whether it's in Israel or abroad. We're going to be operating as a speakers bureau. So for bookings, so stay tuned. We're all excited in 2022 about the All Israel bookings and All Israel tours.
Yeah, there's one question here, Joseph. How long would the journey have taken from Nazareth to Bethlehem? Good question, Tom.
Yeah.
Hannah?
Say, well, it's about 150 kilometers. So that would take, if you walk, 10 days, but probably with resting, it probably will take 2 weeks to get there. I mean, again, if we're following the Gospel of Luke, 2 weeks. If you're following the Gospel of Matthew, they came from somewhere closer. But yeah, but that was a journey people would do. So there are routes, and people would do this journey all the time for Jerusalem, for the feast, for the three pilgrimage feast, and therefore for census, apparently people stayed registered in their hometown, even if they lived far away, so they would have to take 2 weeks to get to their hometown.
Hannah, can I ask two questions? Because I've been thinking about this lately. I've been watching The Chosen, which many of you may have heard of this series, but it really made me think, how did people buy food or get food? Like if you're planning for, like you said, like a 2-week journey, there weren't 7-Elevens along the way. So how did people get food as they were traveling from Nazareth to Bethlehem?
Do you know the Israel Trail?
Yeah.
That now you go from north to south. So you have the angel of the trail and people living along the trail, and they supply food and shelter for travelers. And I guess we took this idea from the Camino de Santiago de Compostela in Spain. So you have along the way, you have people that host people in their house and brings you food and sell you food. So they were not working in the wilderness. I think a lot of people imagine the Holy Land as wilderness. Well, there were a lot of small villages along the way. So you stop in the villages, you sleep in the villages. Well, probably the Holy Family, when they arrived in Bethlehem and slept downstairs with the animal, it was not the first time they did that, because probably along the way they also stayed in places that were simple and spend more nights with animals along the way. But that's what you did. You went from one village to the other and stay there, and you had supply there, and you had to have some funding for that. A poor person would not move from his village, but you have to be, I would say, middle class to be able to travel and to come to Jerusalem or to go to the census. So yeah, so you stayed, you went from one village to the other. And we know that there are small villages along the way, probably either if they came from Samaria area or they came from the valley, so you could stop on the way. Not wandering in the desert for 40 years. They didn't have to pray for manna.
Okay.
Yeah, they were not wandering in the desert, yeah.
Thank you.
Wait, the virtual Holy Land tours, that's Traveluia tours, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I will.
Well, that's just our virtual tour site. And our
Yeah.
regular site is
Just going to- in the chat, I
www.traveluia.com.
don't want to. I'm just going to put it in the chat. So yeah,
That's just
travel. So virtual Holy Land tours is Traveluia site.
well, it's just our virtual tour site. The regular site is this one,
Right.
traveluia.com. Yeah.
Okay, and all Israel bookings, all Israel tours will is a new site that is in addition to, not instead of. Someone asked about, is it going to replace the virtual Holy Land tours? And no, it's an additional site in addition to. Helicopter above us.
Check the news, check back at our website in case there was any news connected with that helicopter. I'll let you know. But well, if there aren't any more questions, I guess I also just want to, bless you guys from Jerusalem and just bless you with a great holiday season, however you're celebrating and wherever you're celebrating. And thank you very much for being here. But we just want to send you our blessings from here.
Likewise, Merry Christmas, Blessed Christmas, and New Year in 2022 for health and life and peace and all the blessings. Amen.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Joseph and Hannah, and thank you all for joining today. And I just want to wish you all much light in your lives and good health and wonderful blessings for this new year. And shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Adonai v'yishmerecha
Yes.
יאר אדוני פניו אליך, ויחונך. יישא אדוני פניו אליך, וישים לך שלום. אמן, אמן, יהי חסדו עליך לאלפי דורות, משפחתך וילדיך דורותיך אחריך, רוחו תלך לפניך לצידך אחריך, מסביבך בליבך